The story begins in a building, and in that building, two men were having a drink with their legs crossed, but the man on blue insisted on having just a cup of wine. The man on yellow was quite disappointed because he had waited for decades to have a drink with him, but he never expected to have only a cup of the drink. The man is Revenge. He poured a drink into the blue man's cup. He then said, "Come to think of it, when I first met you we were both young." For a second, he was expecting a response, but he didn't get any from the blue man. Revenge then said to himself that it's been 40 years when he first met the man on blue. At that time he was very young, but he has the eyes of someone that has seen countless death and horror. The man begged him to use the great regression technique to send him back to the past. Revenge was also very young at that time, and he was quite surprised at his absurd request. So he couldn't give him an instant reply, because the great regression technique is one of the great achievements of his family. It is a technique that has been researched for centuries and passed down. But it is a technique that is close to impossible to use, although Revenge could have completed it. However, he had no choice but to give up because of how impossible it is to gather all the required materials. Although he wasn't able to reply for a moment when the man on blue begged him to use the great regression technique on him because of how impossible it was for the technique to be completed, but he decided to give it a shot. So he told the man on blue to bring him the required materials for the great regression technique. So he gave him the list of required materials. The first is the thunder bell. It is a sacred artifact of the heavenly wind cult. The second material is the divine incense brazier, a sacred artifact of the divine dragon family. The third material is the core essence of the 10,000-year carp. The fourth material is the secret demonic soul of the demonic cult, and the final thing needed is 5 million nyang. Revenge was able to get the 5 million nyang, but other than that, he wasn't able to get anything else. However, the man in blue was able to obtain everything over several decades ago. But to obtain the last material, which is the secret demonic soul of the demonic cult, he disappeared from the world for a long time. He told the man on blue that he thought he had probably died in some nameless unknown valley. Revenge deemed his feat to be hard to believe, so he asked the man on blue how he was able to get all those materials. The man on blue drank his drink and he replied, "I really thought this so-called great technique ought to be fake, because it needed those high-level materials that are close to impossible to obtain. I also considered the possibility of just killing you." Revenge was speechless. He said to himself that he was really young when he first met the man on blue, but now he have become an old man whose hair is all white. Not just that, the air and aura around him has changed a lot as well. He was then wondering if it was inevitable for him to undergo such a change in order to obtain the materials for the great regression technique. He drank his drink. He then asked the man on blue, why exactly is he trying to go back to the past? The blue man angrily placed his cup on the table, and with his eyes filled with hate and anger, he replied for revenge. Revenge was quite surprised by his reply. He then asked him, is it that impossible for him to take revenge, even with his skill, to the extent that he need to go back to the past? The man on blue replied, yes. Revenge then asked him who on earth does he hate so much to be able to go to such length for revenge. The man replied Mugi. Revenge was shocked when he heard that name, because Mugi is considered the strongest person across all history and this era, since he single-handedly killed all the leaders of the 3 strongest groups that supported Murim. The Murim alliance leader was killed by him, followed by the unorthodox leader and the heavenly demon, and with such a feat, Revenge told him that he don't think he can defeat Mugi, even if he go back to the past. The man on blue knew that already, but even so he was eager to kill him no matter what, because the heavenly demon who died by Mugi's hand was his father, although he's not seeking revenge because he killed his father. Nor was it because he killed his sly cunt of a brother, since it's not a big deal for people who have given their lives to demons to be killed, but the main reason why he was eager to kill him is because on that day, Mugi killed the servants, cooks, and even young children who didn't know a single martial art. He even killed all the cats and dogs that were reared. Revenge couldn't believe that Mugi did such a thing. The man on blue told him that he don't care if he believed what he said or not. He then said that in this his current age he won't be able to kill him. So he must go back to the past to kill him. And before he kill him, he would ask him, why did a person as strong as him need to kill even children? Revenge was quite speechless. He then told the man on blue to do him a favor. if the great regression technique really succeeds and he goes back to the past, the man asked him, "What is it?" Ryongja told him that if he goes back to the past he should please come and find him. The man asked him what for. He replied, "I want you to stop me from getting married." There was silence in the room for a moment, since what he said sounded very cringe. The man on blue then laughed out loud. Ryongja told him that he is not kidding. He should please stop him, and he should tell him to live alone for the rest of his life. The man replied, "All right, I promise you that." Ryongja stood up, and he told the man that they should go to the place where the great regression technique will be used. Ryongja was surprised to see the man unable to stand properly, so he helped him to stand up. The man told him that he can still hang on for some while. He lost one arm and one eye, but he deemed it as a cheap price to pay in order to obtain the secret demonic soul. All the necessary materials were placed down, and the final equipment, the demonic soul, was brought out from the container. The energy that comes out from it was quite immense. Ryongja then began performing the spell for the technique, and it combined all the equipment into one, causing a huge energy wave in the room. Suddenly what appeared before them was a portal. Ryongja couldn't believe his eyes, and he was really happy to see that he had finally succeeded. After so many years of waiting, he then said to the man, "Are you seeing this? I told you I will succeed." But when he turned around, he could see that the man was quite irresponsive, and he was breathing heavily. Ryongja couldn't say anything for a moment. He then looked back at the portal. At that moment his eyes was filled with greed. He decided to enter the portal himself, since it is his wish, and his family's greatest wish, to go back to the past. He then said to the man, "I am really sorry. I promise I'll definitely look for you and tell you about the impending disaster." But before he could step any further, he was unable to move his body, since all of his demonic acupoint has been sealed. The man was the one who sealed him. He appeared behind Ryongja and he said to him, "Of all people, how could you do this?" He furiously grabbed Ryongja by his neck, and he slammed him on the ground, making him unable to breathe properly. Ryongja told the man not to be angry since he lost his rationality for a short instant, so he apologized since he knew just how painstaking it was for him to obtain those materials. The man, whose eyes was filled with no emotions after countless years of killing, retracted his hand. He then said to Ryongja, "I am also a selfish person. I cared for no one but myself, and that was how I could gather all those materials. But you know, if you had been anyone else, I would have killed you immediately, but I'll understand since it is you." He then thanked Ryongja for waiting for him his whole life. Ryongja was quite sad and he couldn't hold in his tears. He then apologized for his greed, but suddenly everything stopped excluding the man. He had no idea what just happened, nor what on earth is going on. He then heard a voice telling him that he had passed all the tests. A man then appeared. The man was old, but with a more refined and pure energy, more like a sage. He asked the man for his identity. The man replied, "I am the person who can send you back to the past." He told the man on blue not to think too much about it, since there's no way a human can understand the logic of the heavens. He then said, "Do you think a mere creature and some materials could make traveling in time possible? The true materials of this techniques aren't the materials you brought, but the efforts you have offered to gather all of them." He then told the man on blue that he have passed the test since he have lived his life with one goal in mind, as he sacrificed everything he had, and him forgiving Ryongja was the last test for him, which was actually the toughest test out of everything, but he was able to pass it easily. The man on blue told him to fulfill his wish then, by sending him to the past if he had truly passed the test. The sage asked him what he intended to do when he get to the past. He replied, "I will kill the ones who deserves to die and save those who aren't supposed to die." The sage then asked him, "Is that all you wish to do when you go back?" The man replied, "I want to live my life meaningfully. Maybe the reason why I was desperate to go back to the past is because I regretted the way I lived my life, or having so much anger for Mugi." The sage asked him, "What did you regret?" He replied vigorously, "I regret all of it. Ever since I was born, none of my actions were out of my own free will. They were all driven by certain something. I was pushed around by so many happenings, and before I realized it, my life came to an end." The sage didn't say anything further but one sentence, "I am curious about the kind of life you will live. So I look forward to the new life you will have." He then vanished back to the place he came from, and just like that, the time resumed. All that happened just seems like a seconds in reality, and Ryongja had no idea what happened. Ryongja then said, "I know it's shameless of me to say this, but please don't forget your promise to me. You must stop me from getting married." The man smiled, he turned around and he went into the portal, and the next place he found himself is on an arena. Standing in front of so many martial artists who were cheering on for God knows who, that was when he realized that he really did came back to the past. He turned his head, and he looked up with expectations. He was happy to see his father alive since he was killed in the past by Mugi, but he was distracted by someone, the person said. "For how long are you going to keep us waiting?" The person that was talking placed his sword with vigor on the ground, and he told him that they should start the fight. It was at that moment that he realized he got regressed to the day of the new demon skirmish. The man on blue is the protagonist of this story. His father, the heavenly demon, declared that he won't limit the selection of the next cult leader to only his own bloodline, and as a result, that caused an uproar. Because that meant that anyone could become the heavenly demon as long as they're the strongest. His father launched a fighting competition among the next generational cult leader to show that he was serious about his announcement, which is the new demon skirmish. And the victor of the new demon skirmish would be given the chance to challenge one of the two heavenly demons' two sons, and whoever wins in that fight will be given one wish for the heavenly demon to grant. The guy who ended up winning the fight decided to challenge our protagonist. He told our protagonist to give up while he still can, but our protagonist didn't say anything. Rather, he just remembered what happened before his regression. Back then, he felt really offended that the guy chose him, because his decision meant that he thought he was an easier target than his older brother. But looking back, he could have chosen him for a different reason. That reason is because he bribed the cook that prepares his meal, and asked him to mix energy-dispersing poison into his rice so he can't temporarily use his energy. And as a result, he lost the match because of his dirty trick. Although he told his father what happened, but his father didn't say anything. In fact, he looked at him with eyes that seemed to blame him for falling for such a petty trick. He also did a few things that really pushed him to his limits to make up for today's defeat, and because of the mistakes and failures that he experienced, he was losing his position in the succession war. And everything all started from today's defeat. The guy said to our protagonist, "Are you distracted even though I am right in front of you?" Our protagonist didn't reply back. Rather, he asked him what his name was again. This question really pissed off the guy. Since he thought he was being ignored, he then told our protagonist that his name is Gu Pyungo. Our protagonist remembered the name because he is one of the 7 disciples of one of the 8 demon supremes, the Blood Heaven Sword Demon, whose name is Gu Cheonpa, and Gu Pyungo is his 5th disciple. Pyungo said to our protagonist, "Seeing as how you dare to mess with me, it must mean that you're confident in your abilities." Our protagonist didn't reply. Instead, he looked up at his father. He then said to himself that he didn't realize it in the past, but now he do know that those eyes of his father already knew that he was poisoned by the energy-dispersing poison. But he was observing how he was going to overcome such a problematic situation. Although he would be able to defeat Pyungo in a single move without using any inner energy, because he still have what he learned from his past life, but he can't show his true skills yet, and he needs to hide it for now. And so he raised his hands, he told the crowd vigorously, "I confidently say this, in front of all the heroes of our cult that's gathered here. I'll fight Pyungo, my challenger, without using any inner energy." This came as a surprise to everyone. Even Pyungo was surprised at what he just said, and since the crowd was impressed at how gutsy he was, they all began cheering for him with vigor, calling him the unrivaled swordsman. Pyungo couldn't withstand them hailing our protagonist, and with little to no thought he raised his hands and he said, "If that's how you want to fight, then I too won't be using my inner energy." But he was quite disappointed since he didn't receive the same cheers as our protagonist did from the crowd. The crowd wasn't excited anymore since the fight would be boring if the both of them won't be using their inner energy to fight. Pyungo was really pissed. He then told our protagonist that even though he won't be using his inner energy to fight, he'd best remember that his sword has no eyes and it'll cut anything he strikes. He then pulled out his sword from the ground, and at the same time our protagonist feels foreign in this younger body of his, so he wondered if he'd be able to move it as he wanted to, Pyongo shouted, and he told our protagonist to unsheath his sword. Our protagonist was speechless. He then told Pyongo that he don't think he need to use a sword against him. The crowd laughed and they told Pyongo that it seems that our protagonist is totally looking down on him. Their laughs even triggered Pyongo the more. So he told our protagonist that he won't kill him since he's the cult leader's son, but he'll take an arm of his. He then charged forward to attack. He fiercely swung his blade, but our protagonist was able to dodge it. He was relieved that his body was able to react instantly. It's also faster than he thought. Pyongo launched another attack and it seems like it hit our protagonist, but it was an afterimage since he was very fast to dodge the attack. Our protagonist subtly landed on the ground. He was happy since his heart is beating with so much strength at such a young age. Pyongo was pissed since he dared to laugh while in battle. Little did he know that our protagonist is just testing out his strength and reflexes. This time around our protagonist charged out to attack. Using his elbow to land a heavy blow on Pyongo, this created an opening for another attack, so he launched another fatal hit directly on his face, which broke his nose and pulled out some of his front teeth. This was just a one-sided beating, and it was as if he was trying to pay him back for pulling tricks on him in his past life. He grabbed him by his collar and launched multiple jabs of blow to his stomach. And it was certain that at least 7 out of 9 ribs would have been broken, and as he was about to lose his balance, our protagonist grabbed his hand, the hand that he used to give the poison, and bang! He smashed the bones on his hand with his nails, causing Pyongo to scream out in pain. Everyone was silent at how gruesome the scene was. Our protagonist then said to himself that now that he have returned to the past, he'll no longer let people influence how he live his life. After the battle, the heavenly demon raised his hand, and he asked him to tell him what he desire, since he have said he would grant a wish to the winner. The crowd was waiting with expectations to hear what he would wish for. Our protagonist said to himself that usually people would request for an artisan sword or a secret martial arts manual. That is what everyone's probably expecting him to say, but this time he decided to follow his instincts. He then told his father that he wished to go on a hunt with him. His father was speechless at his wish. Even the crowd was in complete silence. His father then asked him why he wants to go on a hunt with him. He replied saying that he heard he enjoyed hunting when he was young, so he would like to learn how to hunt from him. The heavenly demon looked at him with no emotions in his eyes. He stood up, and he told our protagonist that they'd depart tomorrow at dawn. He then left the scene. At the same time, the other leader stood up and bid him farewell. Pyongo stood up with the help of others, and he called our protagonist an idiot for making such a lousy wish, but our protagonist sarcastically asked him what his name is again. This really pissed off Pyongo, and he was eager to kill him at that moment. Our protagonist then said to himself that now that he's back, the reckless life that all of them have lived no longer interests him. Some hours later, our protagonist arrived at his room. He was looking at himself in the mirror, and he was quite amazed to be young again, unlike his old self. He then wondered what Mugi is doing right now so that he can find him and kill him before he becomes strong. If that happens, then he can resolve the whole matter easily, but the problem is that he is hard to find. Because in his past life he appeared in the Jianghu as if he fell out of the skies, and after he destroyed the Murim Alliance, the Unorthodox Alliance, and the demonic cult, he hid himself from the world. So there isn't much information on him, and if he tries to find him by telling the whole world his name, it would be a dangerous act of provocation. So in conclusion, his top priority is to become stronger than Mugi. Suddenly his servant came into the room. She told him that he fought excellently today. Our protagonist was surprised to see his servant, whose name is Li An. Li An is his bodyguard. He was sad because he didn't know at this time in his previous life that her huge size was because of the martial arts she learned. She even learnt it for his sake. The martial arts she's learning is body petrification technique. The technique temporarily grants the user the ability to make their body as tough as a rock. It's a secret technique only known to certain people. And it was taught to her. The biggest flaw of the martial art is that it makes the user's body really big. In his previous life, she threw herself in front of him to block the sword aura that Hua Mugi sent his way. And thanks to her sacrifice, he was able to live. She asked him why he is looking at her like that. but he couldn't reply because he just realized that her voice sounded so nice. Although she was ready to throw away her life for him, but he only thought of her as a simple bodyguard, and at that time he took her for granted, just like how people take having oxygen in the air for granted. And so he approached her, looked her straight into the eyes and smiled. She's even bigger than he imagined. Everyone said she would become the greatest beauty in the world if she continued growing up the way she once was, but she who used to be so pretty suddenly became fat one day. He didn't know back then that she had cried so much over becoming so fat, and he never noticed how her eyes became swollen because of that. So he wonders how she felt giving up her appearance when she could have become the greatest beauty in the world. But despite she doing all that for him, he treated her more coldly over time after she became fat. He was quite sad and he regretted his actions, so he made a promise to get rid of the body petrification technique's side effect for her. Upon seeing that he's sad, she asked him if he's all right. He replied, "I am good." She then told him that he's acting a little strange today. Our protagonist said to himself that, as expected of someone who protects him every day for noticing how he have changed, he then told her that they should go somewhere, since he wants to show her something even stranger, which is to flip the dining table. After walking for some minutes, they arrived at the resident's kitchen. All the cooks in the kitchen were summoned. Our protagonist then said, "Why did you do it?" But no one knew what he was talking about. He then faced the guy at the end of the row. He asked him for the reason why he poisoned his meal with energy-dissipating poison. The guy was shocked by the question, but he decided to deny doing it. Our protagonist then asked him if he have gambled away the 3,000 yang that he received. It was at that moment that he knew he fucked up. Our protagonist said to himself that the boy incurred a great debt because he got addicted to gambling. He spent all his parents' money, and even the money he borrowed from his friends. That's why he dared to do something as crazy as poisoning his meal. Upon realizing that he had been caught, the boy admitted to his crime. He immediately knelt down, and he begged to be spared. Our protagonist then asked him if Pyungo was the one who looked for him personally to give him the money. The boy replied yes, and just like that, with little to no words, he chopped off the boy's head, spilling blood all over the room. Such a shame that a cook of all people dares to poison the food of others. The head chef immediately apologized, and he decided to take all the blame to himself. Our protagonist asked him for the reason why he wants to take responsibility, since the one at fault is the one who poisoned the meal. The man told him that it's his fault, because everything that happens in the kitchen is his responsibility. Our protagonist was speechless for a moment. He then said to the man, "Do you mean that anything unjust that happens in the cult is my father's fault?" The chef replied, "No." Our protagonist then said, "If that's the case, so why are you trying to take responsibility for the mistakes of someone else?" He turned around and he told the chef to stop talking nonsense and he should go and cook him shredded chicken noodles for dinner since it's been a while he had it. On their way, Lian said to him, "Didn't you just have shredded chicken noodles for dinner?" Our protagonist looked at her. He smiled and he said to himself that although it might be a few days ago, but to him it was a few decades ago. The next day at dawn, standing in front of the Heavenly Demon Pavilion was the Heavenly Demon himself. He asked our protagonist for the reason why he brought all those distracting belongings on him. He replied that they're things that are needed for the next few days. His father was quite surprised when he said few days since he only planned for a day's hunt. But our protagonist told him that he might end up enjoying the hunt and stay for a few more days. His father looked at him and he said, "You've got quite the ambition." And so, after some hours of walking, they arrived in the mountain to prepare for their hunt. His father then told him that he's quite better than he thought. Our protagonist wondered if his father had noticed that he was hiding his skills that he have built up in his past life while fighting Pyungo. If that's the case, then it would be better for him to tell his father, and so he told his father that he was hiding his skills, but his father already noticed. Our protagonist was quite surprised. He then told his father that he is not a cat that hisses, but a beast that hides its claws. His father turned around and asked him, why would a beast hide its claw? This was an unexpected question, since he didn't thought of it from that perspective. His father then asked him how much of the soaring sword art he have mastered. He didn't reply for some seconds. He then said to himself that the soaring sword art is passed down only to the heavenly demon's bloodline. and it's thought to be an extremely advanced martial art, similar to the martial arts learned by the Demon Supremes. He replied saying that he had completely mastered it, but to his surprise, something was shot directly at him at incredible speed, but he was fast enough to dodge it. He said to himself that if he hadn't turned his face away instinctively, his whole cheek would have gone. At first, his father didn't believe him, but since he was able to dodge the attack, that proves that he had really mastered it. He then asked his father with his hand on his cheek that what would he have done if he hadn't dodged it. The father replied saying that he would have simply paid the price for having lied to him. But since he really mastered it completely, he would have been able to dodge it. Our protagonist then said, "Even so, I have a face that resembles yours, and it wouldn't look nice with a scar on it." His father didn't say anything, so he was wondering if he went overboard with his words, but his father wasn't angry. Instead, he told him that him being able to have completely mastered the technique at such a young age is worthy of praise. He was quite touched by his father's praise, since it is the first time for him. They continued their journey. The heavenly demon bent down to look for animal tracks. Our protagonist then asked him from whom did he learn hunting from. His father replied that he learnt it from his older brother. Our protagonist was quite surprised that he had an uncle, but his father told him that he died, and he was the one who killed him when he was around our protagonist's age. Our protagonist never expected such an event to have happened, so he told his father that he made the right decision to kill his brother, otherwise he wouldn't have been born. His father was quite moved by his words, but he didn't say anything. Our protagonist said to himself that even his father, who is the heavenly demon, would have been hurt to fight with his own family. The stronger a person seems on the outside, the deeper their wounds might be. His father then told him that back then he couldn't find any other solutions. Hearing that his father couldn't find a way to win the successor war without killing his own brother made him to think for a moment. He then said to his father, "I hope you won't think that I can win the successor war without killing my brother. In addition, there's no need for me to even consider not killing him because my brother is that vicious and cruel." His father didn't say anything, and so they continued their journey. They ran through mountains as if they were running on normal ground. Our protagonist said to himself that he didn't get married in his past life. That's why he didn't really know how it felt like to have children, so he's curious about what kind of existence was he to his father. After some minutes of running, they arrived at the top of the mountain. His father stood still while looking into the forest, so he asked his father if there is something there. His father told him that the thing in the forest is their dinner. Our protagonist immediately dropped his bags and brought out his hunting equipment so that they can kill the prey, but his father said to him, "Are you going to kill something that you can't even see?" He then told our protagonist to first close his eyes and feel his surroundings. He did as instructed, and so he closed his eyes. He said to himself that when martial masters try to figure out their opponents, they sense the vibrations in the surrounding air. People usually refer to that as energy flow of a being. And now, he can only feel one energy flow in the surrounding which belongs to his father. He was then instructed by his father to send out some energy in a single line, and without breaking that energy, he should make it thinner. He was told to think of his body as a ball of yarn, and slowly discharge his energy as if he's pulling out a thread. He did exactly as instructed, and after his energy has stretched out into the forest, he could feel another form of energy. At first he could feel a tree, but when he slowly searched the vicinity, he could feel another life form. He wasn't sure what it was exactly, so he guessed, and he asked his father if it's a boar or a bear, since it has stiff fur and a long body. His father looked at him for some seconds. He then told him that he guessed it correctly. It's a wild boar. He told our protagonist that at first he was also unable to guess it correctly from their distance. Seeing that his father was praising him indirectly, he told him that something of such difficulty is not a big deal for him, since he is gifted with a body that learns martial arts quickly. And just like that night reached, our protagonist grilled the hunted boar perfectly, which made his father to ask him where did he learn how to prepare hunted animals for cooking. He replied by saying that he learnt it from a book. His father couldn't believe it since he is way too skilled at cooking animals considering he have never done it before. Well, he's quite skilled at cooking because he hunted countless wild boars for food before he regressed. He told his father that it was worth carrying all the heavy baggage since he prepared what he is sitting on so that he could win his favor. Upon hearing what he just said, his father asked him if the reason why he requested for the hunt was because he wanted to impress him and become the successor. Our protagonist replied no, since he knew that it wouldn't work on him, and so he added, saying that he can become the successor on his own without his help. His father said to him, "That's a lot of confidence you have, so tell me, why did you want to hunt with me?" He replied, saying that he had 2 reasons. The first is because he wanted to learn whatever he could from him, so he could become stronger, and he think he have succeeded in his first objective. The heavenly demon then asked him what comes next after he becomes stronger. He replied, "I think you might misunderstand, so I would like to explain myself. I am not trying to become stronger because I want to become the heavenly demon, since you're still healthy and strong, so I don't want to waste my youth trying to become the heavenly demon." He added, saying that he is satisfied if he can learn the heavenly demon's martial arts by becoming a successor. He then said to himself that he need to learn the 9 calamities demonic art quickly and master it. He must also go beyond the 9 calamities, because even his father, who had mastered the 9 calamities demonic art, lost to Mugi. His father then asked him what his second reason was. Our protagonist smiled, and he said that he wanted to spend some time with him alone, since it's their first time doing it, his father said. "That's just a useless emotion that will get you killed," he replied. "Why is it useless? I get to spend time with the strongest person in the world." His father looked at him without saying anything, and he looked back into the fire. Our protagonist said to himself that whenever he tried to remember his father, he had no memories of him. The only memory he had is memory of being scared, which is not counted as memories. So in this life he don't want to only have such memories, he also isn't doing it for his father's sake but for himself. Morning reached, so he suggested to his father that they should go back, but his father told him that they're not going anywhere since he came out to hunt with the heavenly demon. So they need to at least kill a tiger before they leave, and so he told him not to stand around like a dunce and follow him. Some minutes later, they arrived at a spot. His father told him to close his eyes again. The target is on the right side 100 yards away, which is further than the last prey. His father told him to feel the wind this time around and infuse his energy into the wind. He did as instructed. He said to himself that in all the time he spent learning martial arts, he have never thought of infusing his energy into the wind before, since there was no one to teach him that, and none of the martial arts he heard taught it. After infusing his energy into the wind, he was instructed to discharge his energy. He was told not to be slow and careful, or else all he would end up with is just a petty trick, but if he wants to use it in a real situation, then he need to send his energy to his target as quickly as he can. Our protagonist did as instructed. At that moment he could feel the wind and his energy, but he was finding it difficult to combine the two together. And after some minutes of trying, he finally figured out a way to mix his energy and the wind together, which is to entangle the two together, because to infuse it into the wind is not to ride on it. And so he was able to detect his prey by entangling his energy with the wind. He excitedly told his father that there really is a big tiger. His father was really surprised at first, but he hid his emotions and he told him not to get lazy in his training of discharging his energy, because the more line of energy he can maintain, the higher his chances of survival. Night reached. Our protagonist brought out his trump card, which was a jar of wine. He gave his father a bottle, and he took one for himself. When his father drank it, he deemed it to be a good wine. Our protagonist took a sip, and he complained that it's too strong, which was a lie. His father told him that no demonic human would complain about liquor being too strong. He replied, "So what if I can't drink? Having a vicious heart is more important than drinking strong liquor." His father said to him, "A vicious heart, you said? Then can you kill me so that you can live?" He replied, "No. How can a child kill his parents?" Our protagonist said to himself that honestly what he said is also a lie, because if he had enough reasons to kill him, then he could do it even if he is his father. But since it's his first time having a proper conversation with his father, it won't make sense if he treasures his life more than his father's. His father then told him while drinking his wine that if he's hesitant about killing his own parents, then he shouldn't say things like having a vicious heart. He replied, "I'll have to learn how to drink strong liquor then." And that's how their trip ended. our protagonist arrived home, the first thing he did was to digest all he had learned from his father. After focusing on a few days of training since his regression, he's now able to freely infuse his energy into the wind. He's also able to maintain 3 to 4 lines of it. He said to himself that he wasn't expecting his father to teach him how to discharge his energy to check out the surroundings, and so he was happy because what he learned is as good as getting an extra life. The skill will also help him to first find out the enemy that's trying to attack him, and if he continued training and he become capable of releasing more than 10 lines of energy at the same time, he might be able to neutralize any stealth techniques used by his enemies. He then stood up with his sword while looking a little worried. He was worried because even his father, who is much more skilled, lost to Mugi because the Heavenly Demon Pavilion was infiltrated. The Heavenly Demon Pavilion is a place that was thoroughly guarded by 3 barrier formations, 6 trap formations, and a group of carefully selected elites. There are also 8 Demon Supremes in 8 different directions, and their subordinates protecting the Heavenly Demon. In the north, there are the demonic swordsmen of the Northern Heaven Sword family, led by the 1/Sword Supreme. In the south, there's the demonic bladesman of the Southern Heavens Blade family, led by the Blood Heavens Bladesman. In the east, there are the Iron Fists of the Eastern Fist faction, led by the undefeated Fist Demon. In the west, there are the demonic sorcerers of the Western Illusion formation, led by the Soul-Stealing Demon. In the northeast are the Faceless Swordsmen that want to become the evil Smiling Demon. In the southeast, there's the Drunken Swordsman that's always drunk with the demonic drunkard. In the southwest are the Poison Fangs, who research all sorts of poison along with the Poison King. And finally, in the northwest are the Crazy Monks, that are crazy about the demonic Buddha's beliefs of deluding the world. Back then, he thought the enemy had broken in from the outside, however that wasn't the case. He later realized that the outer defense was never broken. And he's certain that someone among the 8 Demon Supremes let Mugi into the Heavenly Demon Pavilion, where the Heavenly Demon was at. So there could be more than one traitor, but the traitor was never found. Our protagonist doesn't care who the traitor was since he treats all 8 Demon Supremes as traitors, because after his father died, none of the 8 Demon Supremes sought revenge. Instead, they decided to close down the demonic cult, although it's an event that would happen in the far future, so he know all about the 8 Demon Supremes. He know the kind of lives they've lived, and what their last moments in life were like. He then decided to make use of the 8 Demon Supremes through and through. But as he was about to head out, he heard someone calling Lian a fatty. The person was rudely asking her if the second young master is still in the training ground. The guy then arrogantly told his subordinates to go in and drag out our protagonist, since he's been waiting for days and he can't wait anymore. Lian was ready to stop him, but luckily enough our protagonist arrived. He scolded her for waiting for him the whole time, when he clearly told her to do her own thing while he was training. Their conversation was interrupted by the guy who came looking for him. He then said to our protagonist, "You're finally out. Why are you suddenly training out of nowhere, and you did it for 4 days at that?" Our protagonist looked at him and he said to himself that the guy is Yang Po, a disciple of the Blood Heavens Bladesman, and the reason why he dares to act in such a rude way is wholly because of the Heavenly Demon. After the Heavenly Demon announced that anyone in the cult could become the successor, him being the Heavenly Demon's son no longer feels that special. In fact, it fueled the ambitious desires of many within the cult to defeat the sons of the Heavenly Demon so that they can gain notoriety. Our protagonist then asked the guy what the hell he wants for coming to his place. The guy replied saying, "Don't you already know about it? Pyungho can no longer practice martial arts all because of you." Our protagonist was like, "So what, you want me to go look after him or something?" Yang Po was really pissed by our protagonist's sarcastic answer. He then angrily told him that he need to take responsibility for crippling Pyungho, so he should go and apologize to him officially. Our protagonist looked at him, and he said to himself that he knows why the guy came to ask him to apologize, and that's because the best disciple of the Blood Heavens Bladesman wasn't selected as a successor. That's why his disciples are trying to impress him by doing whatever it takes, and so Yang Po wants an official apology from him, so that he can claim credit for not making the Blood Heavens Bladesman look bad. Our protagonist smiled, and he told the guy that asking him to apologize doesn't mean that his master would necessarily choose him as his best disciple. Yang Po lashed out, telling our protagonist to stop saying nonsense since he's only here for Pyongo's sake. Our protagonist then said a single word with subtle but yet a dangerous expression: "Enough. I want you to be the one to apologize." The guy asked him for what. He replied, "For speaking rudely to my subordinates, so you should apologize to her." Yang Po was like, "What the fuck, are you kidding me right now?" Li An, who doesn't want things to escalate further, told our protagonist that he shouldn't worry about it, but our protagonist still insisted on getting an apology. He stepped forward, and he told Yang Po that he dared speak rudely to his subordinate, so he wanted him to kneel down and apologize. Yang Po laughed, and he said, "Do you just ask me to kneel down to that fatty over there?" His words were really pissing of our protagonist, but Yang Po didn't care. He then lashed out again, and he asked our protagonist if he has gone crazy. He told him that he would rather die than kneel to her. Our protagonist smiled at his word for choosing death, which was what he wanted to hear. He then unsheathed his sword in order to grant the guy his wish. They were all shocked when they saw how serious he was. Yang Po then said to him, "You've really gone crazy," but our protagonist wasn't interested in any conversation. He then told the guy again to kneel down and apologize or fight him. He should make his choice, he added. "Just so you know, your master won't be pleased if you choose to retreat." Yang Po is already in a difficult spot, because truly his master won't be pleased if he was to retreat from a challenge. He then asked our protagonist why the hell is he going so far. Our protagonist replied saying that he don't care if he's here to look for him. He can even understand if he had come to seek revenge in a group, but he won't allow him to insult his subordinate. Yang Po laughed since our protagonist is really trying to kill him over a fucking pig. Our protagonist replied, "That's how much she means to me." The guy then drew out his sword to prepare for battle. It was a duel, so no one else can interrupt. He then told our protagonist that since he's the son of the heavenly demon, he'll just take one of his arm instead of his life, and so he charged forward to attack. He swung his blade fiercely, but our protagonist was fast enough to dodge, and since his defense was so poor, our protagonist counter-attacked, and his sword pierced through his mouth all the way out of his head. It was a really gruesome and brutal scene, but our protagonist still maintained a demeanor befitting of a protagonist. Yang Po's subordinates came rushing in, but he was already dead. They asked our protagonist if he thinks he can handle the consequences of his actions, but our protagonist didn't even care about that. He then told them to pass on his words exactly the way he say it, and if they dare say anything differently, he will find them at dusk. And just like that, they carried Yang Po on his back and left. Li An then asked him why he would do something like that for her sake. Upon seeing how she's worried about him even though she have been hurt emotionally, he told her that he didn't do it because of her. He just simply killed someone who deserved to die. She was worried, since the Blood Heaven's bladesman wouldn't let his actions slide, since he have killed 2 of his disciples. Our protagonist said to himself that it's understandable for Li An to be scared, because the 8 martial masters of the demonic cult possess great influence, superior martial prowess and subordinates that not even his father the heavenly demon can ignore, and the Blood Heaven's bladesman is one of the 8 demon supremes. And now he crippled one of his disciples, and killed another one of his disciples. He told Li An that the Blood Heaven's bladesman won't do anything because he has nothing to gain from getting involved, but if he was to involve himself, he would just get criticized for teaching his disciples wrongly. Li An thought the Heaven's supreme pride might get hurt if he didn't do anything about his disciples' death, but our protagonist told her that he doesn't have such pride. He then told her not to worry so much about him. He said to himself that on the contrary, he actually will gain something out of killing Yang Po. And the thing would he getting is everyone's attention within the cult, since he crushed Yang Po in a fight, and now he killed Yang Po, and if points were to be given out during the succession war, it would mean that he have just scored himself a point. Li An then thanked him for what he did for her today. Since she was really happy that he took her side, our protagonist smiled, and while he was leaving, he wished that Li An would keep smiling. Some hours later, he sat outside on a rock with his sleeping clothes on. He said to himself that, come to think of it, he was drowned in the sense of defeat as he ran away after the demonic cult disbanded. The sense of depression was so great that he wouldn't have been able to continue living if he hadn't been running towards a goal in life. And that goal was him finding out about the great regression technique and trying to gather the required materials. But suddenly he felt a sword on his neck, and the sword was ready to chop off his head. He was surprised to see that the person holding the sword is the Blood Heaven's bladesman. He never expected him to get to him so quickly. He was then wondering if he can dodge in his current state. But no matter how much knowledge he have gained from his past life, his inner energy is severely lacking, so he won't be able to dodge it. But to his surprise, the man retracted his sword, and he sat down on the rock with him. There was silence there for a moment. The man then looked at our protagonist eerily, and he asked him, why did he kill his disciple? Our protagonist was still scared, but he replied saying that I did it because he acted like a fool. He then asked the man if he had come to pick a fight with the youngest son of the heavenly demon. Man looked at him, pulled out his sword, and pointed it directly at his neck again. He then said to our protagonist, "Should I cut off your head and show it to the heavenly demon? Let's see if he really cares." Our protagonist replied back, "I don't think your blade could slice through my head if you think about my father's terrifying eyes." The man looked at him oddly, pulled back his sword and made a mark on the ground. He told our protagonist that the mark shows how much the heavenly demon cares, and over there at the top, the small ratio belongs to him. And bigger ratio signifies that the heavenly demon doesn't really care. But our protagonist stood up and he drew another line on the ground. He told the man that he would have the highest ratio since he is his son after all, and he would probably matter that much. The man looked at him and smiled. He then said, "We'll know if we test it out. Do you think he will kill me or let me live if I carry solely your head in my arms?" A protagonist replied. "I think you greatly underestimate the love of a father that the heavenly demon has." The man then picked up his sword and he released a huge amount of killing intent so that they should test out and see if the heavenly demon really cares. Although our protagonist was scared shitless, but he said, "There's no need to test it out. The heavenly demon has 2 sons, and there's only one of you." The man released his killing intent and smiled. He then told our protagonist, "You are not as foolish as my disciples." Our protagonist stood up, and he said to the man, "Your disciples wouldn't have died if they were anything like you." The man then said with a serious look on his face, "I have lived my life with misfortune, and I hope we don't meet often," he replied. "I'll be sure to remember that." And as the man left, he could feel a heavy pressure being lifted from his body. He also felt a sudden and sharp pain in his stomach, and it was done by the old man in just a split seconds when he arrived. He said to himself that the Blood Heaven's bladesman might look like he acts as he pleases, but that's not the case. He calculates and plans everything meticulously. And the fact that he repeated twice that he would carry just his head to his father means that he really was thinking of doing it. And maybe the reason why he came to see him personally was because he left a deep impression on him when he fought with his disciple, and he probably thought his wish to hunt with his father was unique. And so he felt the need to test him since he had killed his disciple on top of everything he have done so far. Our protagonist then deduced that maybe the man came to see if he's fit to become the successor. So he wondered if his first opponent for the successor war would be the Blood Heaven's bladesman.